Hello everyone, I'm really glad you're here. Tonight I want to help you let go of the day and ease into rest. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, and it means a lot to be part of your nightly routine. So if you haven't already, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It truly helps. Now, settle in, close your eyes, and let's begin. Story 1. The night the storm brought more than thunder. I've never told this story to anyone, not in full anyway. It sat buried in my mind for years, tucked into a place I tried not to visit, but the memory is still as clear as the night it happened. I was 12 years old. It was a windy Friday afternoon, one of those days where the clouds move across the sky like they're being chased. As the hours passed, the day became increasingly overcast, and the sky darkened in a way that felt unnatural. The wind roared through the trees as I sat in class, distracted by the ominous sky outside. I had always loved weather like this. There was something exciting about it, especially as a kid. As school let out, most of us began the walk home. Our neighborhood was semi-urban, not quite city, and not quite country. I lived in a nearby subdivision, close enough to walk but far enough for the journey to feel like a quiet transition between school and home. That day, I walked with my backpack slung over one shoulder and my eyes scanning the brewing storm above me. The wind tugged at the branches, and I heard distant rumbles of thunder growing closer. Though I usually didn't mind thunder or lightning, at least not while I was outside in the daylight, I picked up my pace. I didn't want to get caught in the rain, especially with the storm gaining strength. Luckily, I made it home just before the downpour began. My mum greeted me with warmth and handed me a hot can of Chef Boyardee Pac-Man pasta. It was the 9980S, and Pac-Man was everywhere, on cereal boxes, t-shirts, and of course, those pasta cans. I remember peeling off the label to find little games and trivia printed inside, something I looked forward to each time it stormed. There was comfort in that routine, something safe and warm while thunder cracked outside and the lightning flickered through the windows like flashes from another world. That night the storm didn't pass quickly. It stayed, growing louder, more violent and more persistent. The thunder rumbled constantly and lightning lit up my room at uneven intervals. My parents went to bed not long after I did, leaving me alone in the dark with the hum of electricity in the air and the occasional crash of thunder to keep me company. I lay in bed, unable to sleep, my eyes darting across the room as shadows shifted with each flash of light. Some of the shadows looked like familiar objects. Others, I was sure, didn't belong. I told myself it was just my imagination, just the tricks of a tired brain in a frightened child's body. And eventually, despite the anxiety, I drifted off. I don't remember how long I slept before I woke up again, but when I did, it wasn't gentle. It felt like I had been hit in the chest by fear itself. You know those moments when you wake up and nothing feels right, like you've been yanked out of a dream and dropped into a scene that doesn't belong to you? That's what it felt like. The air felt wrong. My room was lit up by a bolt of lightning, and that's when I saw him. A man was standing by my bed. A stranger. A man holding a knife. He was close, so close, and I couldn't move. I wanted to scream, but my voice was caught somewhere deep inside my chest. Everything felt frozen, like time itself had paused, stretching every second into unbearable stillness. The man raised the knife and placed it gently, almost mockingly, against my throat. My tears started to fall, silent at first, then rolling freely. The fear was unlike anything I'd ever known. The man didn't speak. He just stood there, breathing heavily, watching me tremble. He seemed to savor it, feeding on my terror. And then, all at once, the moment shattered. A blinding flash of lightning lit up the room, followed immediately by the loudest clap of thunder I had ever heard. In that instant, something unexpected happened. The man jolted violently and dropped the knife. I remember the sound of it hitting the floor, followed by a grunt and the thud of his body collapsing beside my bed. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming again, but when the light switched on and I saw my mother standing in the doorway with a gun in her hand, I knew this was real. She had shot him. My mum had gone to the bathroom and noticed my door, something she never allowed us to keep closed while sleeping, was shut tight. Then she heard the muffled beginnings of my scream, the one that had been smothered by the man's gloved hand. Without hesitation, she got her gun, pushed open the door, and pulled the trigger. The man wasn't dead, but he didn't get up either. He just lay there, groaning and clutching his shoulder. My mother rushed over to me and pulled me from the bed, keeping her weapon trained on the intruder the entire time. She told me to run to her room, to get out of sight, and stay quiet. My dad had called the police while she stood guard, unmoving, staring down the stranger who had entered our home and almost changed our lives forever. I remember sitting in my parents' room, curled up on the floor, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My body still shook. I still tasted tears. I still felt the cold edge of that knife at my throat. When the police arrived, they arrested the man. I never found out his name. I didn't want to. I didn't want anyone asking questions or recognizing the story. I didn't want to be known as that kid, the one who almost got killed in his own bed. It took me a long time to feel safe again. I couldn't sleep in that room for months, and even when I eventually returned, I kept the door cracked open and a light on. The smallest sounds would wake me. A floorboard creak, the hum of the fridge, the sigh of the wind outside. I'd lie still, heart pounding, bracing for the worst. Therapy was out of the question. My parents were tough, the kind of people who believed in moving forward, not digging up the past, but that didn't mean I forgot. You don't forget something like that. You learn to live with it. You learn to bury it deep, to walk through life like nothing ever happened. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if my mum hadn't woken up, if she hadn't gone to the bathroom, if she hadn't acted fast enough. Sometimes I let my mind wander down that dark path and I feel a chill deep in my chest, but then I remind myself, she did wake up, she did act, and because of her, I'm still here. There's something unshakable about knowing you were a breath away from death. It changes you. It changes the way you sleep, the way you walk down the street, the way you hear footsteps in the dark. It makes you cautious, paranoid even. And for a long time, I hated that part of myself. I hated being scared, hated the way my heart would jump at small things. But over time, I've made peace with it. It's not weakness, it's survival. It's the memory of that night whispering through my bones, reminding me that not all monsters live under the bed. Some stand right beside it, with a knife in their hand. And sometimes, the only thing standing between you and them is a parent who doesn't sleep through storms. I'm older now, and I tell this story rarely, if at all. It's not one I enjoy remembering, but sometimes it bubbles up, like tonight. Maybe it's the thunder outside my window, or the flickering shadows dancing on the walls. Maybe it's the way certain memories insist on being felt again, even when you try to keep them buried. But whatever the reason, I'm writing this now as a way of letting it breathe, of honouring the fear and the strength and the strange, silent miracle that saved me that night. I was 12. I didn't understand then what had really happened. But now I do. I lived. And not because I was lucky, because someone loved me enough to check my door. Story 2, The Tunnel Beneath the Bridge. When I was in the 5th grade, I walked to school every day with a group of friends from the neighbourhood. Our small town wasn't anything special, just rows of modest houses, quiet streets, and lots of kids wandering around on their own. My mum had walked me to school when I was younger, but starting in 3rd grade, she let me go alone. It was the kind of place where parents felt safe doing that. Most of the kids took the same route each morning, passing by familiar houses, empty lots, and one strange little path that branched off toward the woods. This path had a bridge over a shallow ditch, and underneath the bridge was a large, round metal tunnel. It looked like one of those big drainage pipes, wide enough for a person to crawl through, and when you stood far enough back, you could see straight through to the other side. Nobody ever walked through it though. It smelt awful, and even on the sunniest days, the inside was pitch black. The tunnel had always spooked me a little, but once I started walking with my friends, it became more than just a creepy landmark. It turned into the centerpiece of an evolving legend. One boy said a troll lived in there, just like in the story of the 3 billy goats Gruff. Another claimed he'd seen glowing eyes staring out from the shadows. By the time we reached 5th grade, the story had matured into something darker. A serial killer, they said, lived in the tunnel. He only came out at night. He lured kids in with candy or whispers. Some even claimed he had taken children before. It was, of course, a myth, but the kind of myth that's just believable enough to unsettle a young imagination. Still, it became a rite of passage to stand near the tunnel or toss a rock inside to see if anything stirred. Most of us didn't get closer than a few feet, but one afternoon, that changed. It had been a regular school day, and we were all hanging out afterward, sitting on curbs and daring each other to do dumb things. It started with small dares: touch a mailbox, hop over a bush, and then someone brought up the tunnel. One of my friends dared me to walk all the way through it. My stomach dropped. I didn't want to do it, but I also didn't want to be called a coward. At that age, there's no insult worse than chicken. I tried to laugh it off, to change the subject, but the chant began anyway. Do it. Do it. Do it. I looked at their faces and knew they wouldn't stop. So, with my heart hammering in my chest, I agreed. We walked to the forest's edge, following the path toward the bridge. As we got closer, everything seemed quieter than usual. Even the wind felt hushed, like the world itself was holding its breath. The tunnel looked darker than ever that day. As I descended into the shallow ditch that ran beneath the bridge, the smell hit me first, rotten and metallic, like damp earth mixed with decay. My friends stayed up top, refusing to go any further. I stepped carefully toward the tunnel's mouth, each step louder than it should have been, echoing in the stillness. I could see the far end faintly lit by sunlight, a distant circle framed by shadows, but the middle section, the deepest part, was cloaked in black. I paused at the entrance. My instincts screamed at me to stop, to turn back, to tell my friends I had done enough. But I didn't. I took a breath and stepped inside. The air grew colder immediately and the smell intensified. I could hear the echo of my own footsteps bouncing off the tunnel walls like distant whispers. My eyes scanned the darkness, straining to adjust. Then I saw it. A figure sitting dead center in the middle of the tunnel. At first I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but as I crept forward, it became clear that I wasn't alone. My heart pounded as I froze in place, trying to decide whether to run or confront whatever was ahead. The figure wasn't moving. I squinted, leaning in just slightly. It was small, like a child, maybe even someone my age. They weren't facing me. They weren't reacting at all. I called out, hesitantly, my voice bouncing back at me in warped echoes. No answer. I took another step closer. Still nothing. The closer I got, the more details I noticed. The clothes were dirty. The skin, what little I could see, looked pale, almost grey. My gut twisted. Something was wrong. I reached out and gently nudged the boy's shoulder. He didn't move. That's when I noticed the smell wasn't just coming from the tunnel. It was coming from him. It hit me like a wave. The body was cold, unmoving and discolored. There was no doubt in my mind this boy was dead. Panic surged through me. My breath caught in my throat. and I stumbled backward. My legs felt like jelly as I turned and bolted toward the light at the end of the tunnel. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if something or someone was coming after me. I just ran. When I emerged on the other side, I was breathless and shaking. My friends were waiting up top, whooping and clapping, assuming I'd gone through the whole tunnel just to prove them wrong. But one look at my face silenced them. I told them what I saw, that there was a dead boy inside. They didn't believe me at first. They laughed. They teased. I insisted. I begged them to come look. Eventually they stopped laughing, but they still didn't follow me back. So I did the only thing I could. I went back to school and told the principal. He seemed skeptical, but something in my voice must have convinced him to call the police. Maybe it was the panic. Maybe it was the way I couldn't stop trembling. The officers arrived quickly and went straight to the tunnel. They found the body exactly where I said it was. The boy had been reported missing in another state months earlier. No one knew how he ended up under that bridge, hidden in plain sight just a short walk from our school. The police said he'd likely died from suffocation, possibly during a kidnapping. The person responsible had dumped his body there and vanished. For weeks, our town buzzed with rumors and fear. Parents stopped letting their kids walk to school alone. The path by the woods was cordoned off. And that tunnel, once the subject of childish dares, became something much darker. A place no one talked about, a place no one went near. Even now, as an adult, I think about that day often. I see the tunnel in my mind, the shadowy figure sitting still in the dark. I see the grey skin, the lifeless eyes. I hear the echo of my own voice calling out into silence. That moment changed me. It stole the last bit of innocence I had. I've searched the internet countless times, trying to find details about the case, but nothing ever comes up. Maybe the boy was never identified. Maybe the story was buried, lost in a pile of unsolved files. Or maybe it's still open, waiting for someone to remember. I remember. I always will. And whenever I hear thunder rumbling through the sky, or smell wet earth after a storm, I'm taken back to that tunnel, to the shadows, to the boy who never got to walk out into the light. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't taken that dare, if I had said no, if I had walked away. Would someone else have found him? Or would he still be there, waiting in the dark, his story untold? I've never returned to that path, never visited the bridge again. But I hear it in my dreams sometimes. Echoes of footsteps, the smell of rot, the cold air brushing against my skin. And in those dreams I see him again, not as a body, but as a boy, alive, lost, stuck in that endless twilight beneath the bridge. I want to reach for him, to pull him out, but my arms won't move. My feet are stuck. And just before I wake up, he turns to look at me, and his eyes are filled with something I can't explain. Not fear, not anger, but something deeper, something that follows me even after I open my eyes. Story 3, The Babysitter Named Elaine. There are some stories that remain buried inside you for years, festering in silence, quietly shaping who you become without ever being spoken aloud. This is one of those stories. I've told pieces of it to people I've trusted, in whispers, in fragments, always with hesitation. But I've never told it like this, not all at once, not without breaking it into something smaller and easier to swallow. I was around 11 years old when Elaine entered our lives. My parents had divorced, and my dad had recently gained custody of me, my brother, and my sister. He was in the Navy and spent long stretches at sea, so the military provided us with live-in babysitters. The first one, Lee, was kind, sweet, even. She cried when she left, telling us she loved us. We later learned she quit because my dad had made advances toward her. Then Elaine moved in, and everything changed. Elaine was a large woman, imposing in presence, and deeply religious. She was a Jehovah's Witness. That fact might not seem important, but in our lives it was. It defined her, controlled her, and ultimately justified her cruelty. She didn't believe in celebrating holidays, and because of that, neither could we. My siblings and I had always looked forward to gifts, decorations, and the shared joy of birthdays and Christmases, but Elaine hated those things. She called them sinful and threw away any gifts we received. I remember one day dropping a Transformer toy on the floor. It slipped out of my hand and bounced near her feet. Without hesitation, she stomped on it. Then she collected every toy I had, my Transformers, my He-Man figures, and threw them in the trash. I cried, but she demanded I stop. When I didn't, she punished me again. My dad did nothing. David, my older brother, was my protector. Even as a kid, he had this quiet strength. But he couldn't always be there, and Elaine knew that. One night, I put on a glow-in-the-dark mask that belonged to David. We shared everything. It was never a big deal, but when Elaine saw me wearing it, she ripped it off and screamed that I was sinning by using something that wasn't mine. She made me stand by the bed, both hands flat on the mattress, and began reading passages from the Bible about stealing. Then she picked up a belt and began hitting my hands, over and over. The sting turned to welts, and then the welts turned to open skin. I screamed and cried, but the more I cried, the harder she hit me. I was just a boy, 11 years old, and she was breaking me. That wasn't the first time she did something like that, and it wouldn't be the last. She broke my hand once, the same one I had fractured years before. I never saw a doctor for it, even though my dad could have taken me. We were a Navy family. Medical care was free. But no one took me. My hand healed wrong, and to this day I still feel the damage. I remember crying on my bed for hours after that beating. When my father finally confronted Elaine, I heard her tell him, "I did it out of love." I will never forget those words. Her version of love was cold, violent, and weaponized with scripture. She used religion like a club, and every strike made me feel more alone in that house. She used silence as a punishment too, eventually forcing the whole family to ignore me entirely. My siblings wanted to talk to me, especially my sister, but Elaine forbade them, and they listened, until one day, my sister broke down sobbing and begged our dad to intervene. To his credit, he finally did. He told Elaine that if she ever made them ignore me again, he would fire her. That confrontation changed things, but not for long. A week before Thanksgiving, we all came down with the flu, me, my siblings, and Elaine's son, Arius. We were miserable. I lay in bed sweating, my stomach cramping, my head spinning. It felt like a fever dream. Elaine made us drink unsweetened peppermint tea over and over. It was supposed to help, but it made us sick. We vomited it up every time, but she didn't care. When my sister tried to pour hers down the toilet, Elaine caught her and made her drink a fresh cup. And when we cried, she threatened us with a fly swatter. I still remember that tea, bitter, sharp, and vile, and how powerless we felt. Even my sister, strong as she was, couldn't escape Elaine's wrath. At some point, I asked my dad for a drawing pad. I just wanted something to do while I was sick, something that was mine. Drawing wasn't even something I was good at, but it gave me peace. Elaine didn't like that. She accused me of copying David and Eris, who were both talented artists. Then she took the pad and told me I was never allowed to draw again. When I cried, yet again, she threatened more punishment. My fever climbed to 104 degrees. I was burning up. I couldn't move. I lay there, terrified I might die in that bed, alone and ignored. My dad brought me a Pepsi and some Oreos. Not exactly get-well food, but in hindsight, I think he thought I might not make it through the night. It felt like a farewell. And honestly, in that moment, I believed it too. I didn't die, but I also didn't recover for a long time. I had nightmares, some of which still return in flashes, even now. I remember dozing off and suddenly crying in my sleep, convinced that if I closed my eyes I'd never wake up again, that I'd vanish, that everything that made me me would be erased forever. Eventually my fever broke, but the trauma didn't. After weeks of this, my dad finally fired Elaine. He didn't confront her in person. He slid a note under her door. She left without a word, and I never saw her again. You'd think that would be the end, that her absence would bring peace, but instead it left a hole filled with questions and fear. I used to wonder what would happen if I ever saw her again. I'd like to think I'd be calm, composed, healed, that I know myself. I know the rage. I'm not a violent person. I avoid conflict. I hate confrontation. I'm one of the most peaceful people you'll meet. But when I think about her, really think about what she did to me, how she made me feel like nothing in my own home, I feel something dark, a fury that simmers quietly inside me. I've never acted on it. I hope I never do. But it's there, and that scares me, because she didn't just hurt me physically. She carved her cruelty into my sense of worth, into my memory, into the way I see myself. Abuse like that doesn't fade. It calcifies. It grows roots. And even now, as an adult, I sometimes flinch at kindness, unsure whether it's real or just the calm before another storm. So if you're reading this, and if you've ever wondered whether emotional scars can last decades, the answer is yes. They can. They do. Elaine may have left my house, but she stayed in my mind. And no matter how many years pass, part of me is still that little boy with bruised hands and a broken toy, begging to be seen, begging to be believed. I don't need sympathy. I'm not writing this to be pitied. I'm writing this to let it out, to finally give voice to the silent scream I carried for years, and maybe, just maybe, to remind anyone else who's still holding their breath in the dark, you are not alone. Story 4. Ernest and the car that wouldn't stop. I was 17 when I met Ernest. I was that odd kid in high school, the one with colourful hair, piercings and music tastes that no one else in my southern town could relate to. We lived near Atlanta, but it felt like a world apart. The other students didn't understand me, and I spent most of my time trying to find people who didn't flinch at the things I liked. One day in gym class, I was hanging around a group of misfits when I noticed a guy I hadn't seen before. He wore a faded Guns N' Roses t-shirt, jeans that clung too tightly to his lanky frame, and a heavy stare. His name was Ernest, and he had a kind of presence that didn't fit anywhere. We started talking, joking mostly, bonding over sarcasm and cynical commentary on the jocks playing basketball. At first, it was harmless. At first, it felt like friendship. It wasn't long before the teasing began. What started as jokes turned darker. He made fun of my acne, calling it meth skin. He mocked my clothes, my voice, the way I walked. I told myself he didn't mean it, that it was just a twisted way of being close. I kept hanging around him. It felt easier than trying to find new friends. Eventually, he invited me over to his house. We only stayed in his room. He never introduced me to his parents, claiming they didn't speak English. I found that odd, especially since his siblings could all speak Spanish while he only spoke in something that sounded vaguely Eastern European. His room was always playing It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and he rambled constantly about superheroes and how he'd be a powerful villain if given the chance. It was strange, but I chalked it up to eccentricity. We were all weird after all. Then he got a job where I worked, a pizza place. Suddenly, we were always together. He gave me rides in his beat-up PT Cruiser, a car that still gives me chills when I see one today. He took me to school, picked me up from work, and spent more time with me than anyone ever had. But what had once felt like friendship started to feel like a trap. He began controlling every aspect of my life. We skipped school constantly, 2 or 3 days a week, at most. My grades fell apart. My parents didn't know how to stop it. Then the pressure started. He began pushing me to do sexual things. I won't share the details, not because I can't, but because I've tried to forget them. He manipulated me, convinced me we were in a relationship even though I was repulsed by the very idea. He told others we were together. I denied it every time. To this day, I still do. At one point, he even moved into my house. He convinced my family he was gay so that he could stay in my room. He wore pink wrapped scarves around his neck and played up the performance. It worked. My mum fell for it, believing the act. Meanwhile, he kept me on edge. Every day was chaos. One time, I asked for a ride, and he said no reason, no explanation. Just stared at me with a smug smile. Another time, he disappeared without a word and came back an hour later, changed into sleep pants with one hand hidden in his pocket. When I forced his hand out, he was holding a knife. I don't remember what happened after that. My memory blanks around moments like these, as if my brain refuses to keep them. But I know it wasn't the last time I feared he might hurt me. Then came the night of the party, my best friend Kayla's party. We were camping in her backyard. Kayla didn't like Ernest. She knew something was wrong. She was the only person who ever confronted me about it. That night, I shared a tent with a boy I had a crush on. His name was John. I didn't even kiss him. I just wanted to feel safe, to feel close to someone who wasn't trying to break me down. Morning came, and I heard Ernest's voice outside. He was asking people where I was. Someone told him I was in the tent with John. And then the zipper ripped open. I'll never forget the sound. Ernest screamed, not with anger, but with a kind of betrayal, as if I'd committed some unspeakable crime against him. He yelled curses, stormed off to his car and called me, told me to get in. Kayla warned me not to. She said it wasn't safe, but I didn't want to make a scene. I thought that if I got in the car, maybe he'd calm down. Maybe I could prevent him from doing something worse. So I did. I got in, and as soon as the door shut, we sped off. I wasn't buckled in. I just stared at him. He was crying, tears falling fast, but his face was emotionless. His voice shook as he repeated, "You were supposed to love me." Over and over again. Then he said it. "If I can't love you, no one else can." He pressed down on the gas. We were flying. The car swerved as my vision narrowed. I couldn't hear anything but my own breathing. Kayla had called my mum, and somehow, by some miracle, she caught up with us. We pulled into a church parking lot. Ernest was holding a box cutter. My mum called me. I answered. I don't remember what she said, but it brought me back to myself. Ernest dropped me off, saying he was going to kill himself. Kayla and I tried calling his family, but they didn't speak English. Eventually, he called the police on himself. He was gone for a few weeks. When he came back, he was waiting outside my school. I remember the plaid shirt, the tucked-in pants, the fake calm. He walked up to me like nothing had ever happened. Spoke like a gentleman, like someone new. It was a performance, one so uncanny that it made my skin crawl. I started breaking down soon after. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. I admitted myself into a mental health facility. I told them everything. The group therapy sessions were the first time I saw my story from the outside. When others heard it, their eyes filled with horror. That's when I realized how bad it had truly been. I cut him off after that, blocked every number, deleted every photo. I found new friends, ones who saw me not as someone to control or fix, but as someone to simply exist beside. I still have panic attacks. I still flinch when I see PT Cruisers. I still struggle to believe I can say no without consequences, but I'm better now. I'm alive, and more than that, I'm free. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't gotten out, if I had stayed, convinced that manipulation was love, that control was protection. But I did get out, and that matters more than anything. I know this story sounds extreme. It is. but it's also real. It happened. And if you're listening to this, and if someone is making you feel small, scared, or trapped, please know that there's a way out. This isn't just a scary story. It's a survival story. A story of reclaiming my voice after years of silence. I've lied to therapists. I've lied to friends. But not today. Today, I tell it true. Ernest, if you ever hear this, let's not meet again. Ever. Not in dreams, not in crowds, not in memory. Not anywhere. I'm done carrying your shadow. I'm done giving your name power. My story is mine again, and I plan to keep it that way. Story 5. The Desert Road and the Drunk Men. It happened more than 20 years ago, but I remember it as clearly as if it had just happened last night. I was 16, living with my mum and stepdad out in the middle of nowhere, 70 miles west of Las Vegas, Nevada. Our home was surrounded by the barren stretches of the Mojave Desert, where there were more jackrabbits than neighbors, and the sky swallowed you whole once the sun dipped below the horizon. That night, I had just gotten permission to drive myself to visit some friends for the very first time. It felt like freedom. We went to the movies, got food, laughed like kids who didn't yet know what fear really meant. My curfew was 10 p.m. and my parents were clear about one thing. If I was running late, I had to find a payphone and call. That was the rule. That was the only condition of my newfound freedom. As I drove back home in my old 71 Chevy pickup, the world felt like it had shrunk. There were no streetlights for miles, and the only glow came from my headlights stretching out over the empty desert road. The stars above blinked cold and far away. Just as I approached the first of 2 stop signs, I saw it. An older sedan parked on the shoulder with its hazard lights flashing weakly into the dark. Normally, I'd have kept driving, but growing up in the desert teaches you a certain code. When someone's stranded, you stop. People die out there without water or help. It was just something we did. So, I pulled up behind the car, expecting to offer a ride to a gas station or maybe help them make a call. A man in his late 30s or 40s started walking toward me. He didn't look panicked. He looked like he'd done this before. I rolled down my window. That was my first mistake. As he got closer, the stench of alcohol hit me thick and sharp. I glanced at the car again and saw another man sitting in the passenger seat. They weren't in trouble. They were drunk. Still, the man at my window asked for help. He said his car had stalled and asked if I could push start it with my truck. I asked if it was a stick shift. He nodded. I knew how to bump start a car, and I didn't want to get out and push it physically, especially not with 2 strangers and no one else in sight. I agreed. I gently bumped the back of their car with my truck and slowly pushed it forward. They managed to turn over the engine and get it running. I expected them to drive off. I expected to watch their taillights fade into the distance. But that's not what happened. Instead, they got out of the car again, walked back toward me, thanked me, and then one of them asked if I wanted to hang out with them. Something about the way he said it sent a chill crawling across my skin. I declined, trying to keep my voice polite. I didn't want to escalate anything. I just wanted to get home. They smiled, too wide, and walked back to their car. I drove off, slowly, trying not to seem scared, but within seconds, I saw headlights in my rearview mirror. They were following me. Close. Too close. My heart started pounding. I told myself maybe they were just heading the same way. Maybe it was all a coincidence. So I turned down a side road. A narrow loop I knew could take me back to town or toward the gas station where the only payphone in miles stood under a flickering canopy of light. They followed. Every turn I took, they matched. Left, right, straight, still behind me. That's when panic really set in. My mind raced with possibilities. I thought about the weight of the darkness, the isolation of the desert, the way it could swallow you whole and never give you back. I turned down a residential road that led to a few scattered homes, places where porch lights were always left on, even if no one was home. They followed. I circled back toward the gas station. They followed. Finally, I decided to test them. I pulled over to the shoulder, turned off my headlights and waited. They pulled up behind me. Then, slowly, both of them got out and started walking toward my truck again. This time, I didn't wait. I floored it. Gravel spun beneath my tires, dust rising behind me like a smoke screen. I took off down the road, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I didn't stop until I reached the gas station. The place was empty, no attendant visible behind the counter, no cars at the pumps, just silence and that awful buzzing light above the payphone. I grabbed the receiver and called home. My stepdad answered. I told him everything, about the stalled car, the drunk men, how they were following me now. He stayed calm, but I could hear the tightness in his voice. He told me to stay where I was, under the lights, to wait, to come straight home after. He didn't scold me. He didn't tell me I'd broken curfew. He just told me to be safe. I hung up and climbed back into my truck, locking the doors behind me. The headlights didn't return. The men never showed up again. Maybe they got scared. Maybe they found someone else. I never knew. But I drove home with every nerve in my body on fire. That night changed me. Before then, the world had felt safe. My biggest worries were curfews, grades, and which friends I'd see over the weekend. Afterward, I started noticing things. Who was behind me on the road, which doors were locked, where the exits were. I carried that fear for years. I still do, in some ways. I've told the story to a few people over the years. Some shrug it off. Others ask why I didn't just call the cops at those roads. Those endless miles of silence and sand. They weren't made for waiting on help. You did what you had to in the moment. And in that moment, I survived because I trusted my instincts. Because I didn't roll the dice on kindness again. Even now, I can still see their silhouettes in the moonlight. Two strangers emerging from the shadows of a car they pretended was broken. I can still feel the weight of their eyes on me. And I can still feel the surge of my heart as I hit the gas and left them behind. They didn't get me, but they could have. That's the part I can't let go. That's the part that sometimes wakes me in the middle of the night. So, to the two drunk men in the middle of the Mojave, thank you for reminding me how fast the world can change, for showing me what it means to run, and most of all, for giving me a reason to always, always trust my gut. Story 6. The Man Who Stayed Upstairs. Looking back, I realize I made a lot of questionable decisions, but at the time, I was 15 and didn't know what else to do. I was living alone in a 2-story house, which might sound strange, but my situation was complicated. Though there were bedrooms upstairs, I always slept downstairs on the living room couch. It wasn't because I was lazy or just wanted to be near the TV. I had reasons. That spot gave me full awareness of the entire house. I could hear everything. More importantly, it placed me at an equal distance from every exit. If anything ever happened, I wanted to be able to run, quickly and in any direction. It was a defense mechanism, one I didn't even fully understand at the time, but that instinct to survive had been part of me for as long as I could remember. One night, around 2 a.m, I heard something that made my blood run cold. The front doorknob was moving, slowly, cautiously, like someone was trying not to be heard. I stayed still on the couch, heart pounding, straining to listen through the thick silence. The noise didn't stop. In fact, it grew more impatient, like whoever was on the other side of the door was getting frustrated. I didn't call the police. I couldn't. I was an unemancipated minor living alone, and I was terrified of being found out, of being taken away or placed in foster care. My life may not have been perfect, but it was mine. Eventually, the jiggling stopped. I lay there in the dark, clutching a metal bat I kept nearby and waited. No one came in. Nothing else happened that night. But I didn't sleep. A few nights passed without incident. Then, just as I was beginning to relax, something even worse happened. I was drifting off to sleep when I heard a sound from upstairs. A door opening. Now, the upstairs doors in that house were old and swollen with humidity. They stuck in the frames and made loud, scraping noises when pushed open. That's what I heard. This long, shuddering grind, like wood rubbing against wood, followed by a pop as the latch released. My eyes shot open. I couldn't tell if it was a dream or if I was actually awake. I had taken sleeping pills earlier that evening, so my mind was foggy. I lay there, unsure if what I heard was real. Then, after a pause, I heard the sound of bed springs creaking, as if weight had just been added to a mattress. It was so specific that my heart nearly stopped. At first I thought it might be a homeless person. Maybe someone had come across the house, assumed it was empty, and decided to sleep there. That was the only logical explanation I could cling to. My thoughts raced, every possibility darker than the last. But my body wouldn't move. I was frozen. The sleeping pills had dulled my reactions, and my limbs felt too heavy. I slipped in and out of consciousness. At one point, I woke to the sensation of being watched. It wasn't a sound or a movement. It was a presence. I could feel it, thick in the air like static. I looked toward the staircase, and that's when I saw him. A man was crouched halfway down the stairs, just staring at me. I could barely make him out in the dark, but his outline was unmistakable. His long hair hung forward, his body twisted slightly as he watched me from the shadows. We just stared at each other for what felt like hours. Neither of us moved. I reached slowly for the bat beside the couch. As soon as my fingers curled around the handle, he began to rise, without turning, without flinching, and backed up the stairs. It was one of the eeriest things I'd ever seen. He didn't flee. He didn't lunge. He just returned to the darkness from where he'd come. I didn't hear him walk around. I didn't hear the door shut. It was like he melted into the silence, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I didn't sleep that night. I kept my eyes fixed on the staircase, afraid he'd return. But he didn't. Not that night. The next day, I told my boyfriend what had happened. He was skeptical, but when we arrived at my house, he pointed out that one of the upstairs windows was wide open. My heart dropped. That was the same room where I heard the creaking bed springs. We searched the house together, closets, cabinets, even under the beds, but found nothing. Still, I felt watched. That night, I stayed downstairs again, this time refusing to take any sleeping pills. I needed to be alert. And sure enough, in the dead of night, I heard the same door open upstairs. There was no doubt now. It was real. Someone was up there. And this time, they knew I knew. My heart pounded as I grabbed the bat, turned on every light I could, and yelled, "I'm coming up! You better be out of here by the time I get upstairs!" I didn't wait. I marched up the stairs, bat in hand, ready for whatever or whoever I might find. I flung open doors, checked behind shower curtains, and through open closets. No one. Everything was still. But I never checked under the beds. That thought didn't even occur to me until much later. I stayed up until the sun came up, feeling both triumphant and foolish. Had I scared them off, or had they simply hidden better this time? The next morning, as I was leaving for school, I noticed something that made my blood turn to ice. The window was open again. The very same one. Someone had been in there. Maybe while I was asleep, maybe while I was searching. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't checked under the beds. He could have been there the whole time, lying in wait, watching me. From that moment on, I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been inches from me, watching, waiting. Every night, I slept with the bat against my chest, my back to the wall, and the lights on. I became paranoid, checking locks, windows and closets obsessively, but the man never returned. Or if he did, he stayed hidden. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I bent down to check under the bed that night. Would I have found him there, eyes wide and waiting? Would I have screamed? Would he have attacked? The uncertainty lingers. It's worse than any horror movie. Because it was real, because it happened to me, and because I'll never know how close I really came to danger that night. The story 7, my best friend's secret. Some stories don't feel real until you say them out loud. They hover in the corners of your memory like shadows you try to avoid. I've told this one only a few times and never fully. I grew up in Central Florida, in a sleepy town that tried very hard to be New Jersey. My best friend and I met in 6th grade after I overheard her talking about bionicles, which just so happened to be my greatest obsession at the time. From that moment, we became inseparable. We navigated everything together: school, sleepovers, awkward crushes, bad family holidays. I came out to her as bisexual when I was 14, and in return, she confided in me that she was trans. That moment, that exchange of vulnerability bonded us in ways most friendships never reach. We were more than friends. We were soul siblings, and through the turbulence of our home lives, we clung to each other. Her home life was hard. Her dad drank and punished with fists instead of words. Her mother was a strange relic of 1980s flower child optimism. Vegan, spiritual, always burning incense and preaching love, but rarely showing it. Her sister, once sweet, grew bitter and drifted toward the jocks and popular girls by the time we hit high school. By our early 20s, nothing much had improved for her. She bounced from job to job. At one point she worked at Walmart but got let go, and I tried helping her back on her feet. We spent another night, like so many before, her staying over, trying to forget the latest fight with her mum. It felt like a familiar rhythm. I thought it would pass like all the others. The next morning I had to get to my first shift as a new employee at Taco Bell, and I remember being proud but was doing okay, and I hoped she would be too. On the drive back to her place, she told me she wanted to start applying for delivery driver jobs. She had a car now. She seemed hopeful. It made me smile to see her like that, something close to confident. My shift went well. Everyone was kind. I was nervous, but it felt like a good kind of nervous. The kind that comes with change, not fear. I came home that afternoon, posted online about my day, and by evening, I was ready to sleep. It had been a long one. Just as I began to drift off, I got a message from her. Another fight. Another storm. She wanted to come over again. I hesitated. I was exhausted and emotionally worn. I didn't respond. I left the message on read and let sleep take me instead. I didn't think it would matter. I never imagined what that decision would cost. Hours later, I woke up to her bursting into my room, shaking and covered in blood. I wasn't fully awake, and at first I thought I was still dreaming. I got up, disoriented, and wandered to the bathroom. When I came back, she was rocking back and forth on my bed. That's when I noticed the blood. I asked her what happened. She looked up at me, eyes wide and wild, and told me she'd just watched her mother be murdered with a knife. My body locked up. I didn't know what to say. It didn't make sense. She wasn't crying, she wasn't screaming. She just rocked and mumbled and said it again. I tried to push the doubts away, tried to believe her. After all, she was my best friend, had been for over a decade. But there was a voice in my head, small and cold, that whispered, "Something's wrong." I told my sister. I told my stepdad. They didn't believe her story either. My stepdad asked the obvious question, why did she come here instead of calling the police? Why did she walk into our house, not a hospital or a precinct? I argued for her, made excuses, weak ones I didn't even believe. Still, I convinced her to call the police. I stood nearby as she described a man in a ski mask, A shadowy killer, someone who broke in and did the unspeakable. Officers came, took her to the station, brought in her sister and her father. I rode with her to the sheriff's office. I remember staring out the window, watching the streetlights blur, not knowing which way was up anymore. I had to work the next day, so I asked to be taken home. I lay in bed that night, unable to sleep. The image of her sitting on my bed, soaked in blood, etched into my mind. The next day at work, I was numb. I told my manager what happened and kept working anyway. I just needed something to focus on. But when I got home, everything changed. My sister told me the truth. My best friend had confessed. There was no masked man, no break-in. She had stabbed her mother to death during a fight about money and jobs. The truth hit me like a collapsing ceiling. Everything inside me fell at once. My mind froze. I turned to my computer, where I'd been in a voice call with online friends. All I could say was, my best friend just confessed to killing her mother. Then I disconnected and crawled into bed. I couldn't cry. I couldn't scream. I could only lay there, empty and cold, like a shell left behind after a storm. She took a plea deal. Life in prison to avoid the death penalty. Her trial happened on the 7th of the month. I never attended. I couldn't. A part of me wanted her to suffer, wanted the court to take everything from her the way she took everything from me. Another part just wanted it to end, to stop thinking about the girl I once shared cartoons and secrets with. I looked back on our childhood memories and realized how deeply she'd been hurting. Maybe she'd always been slipping and I just hadn't seen it. Or maybe I had and I just didn't want to. That's what hurts the most, knowing that love wasn't enough to save her, knowing that being her friend didn't keep her from turning into someone I couldn't recognize. I think about that night often. I think about the message she sent, the one I ignored. What if I had answered? Would it have changed anything? Or was it already too late? That's the trap trauma sets for you. Looping what-ifs and maybes in an endless circle until you can't breathe. I want to remember her as the person I grew up with. The one who braided my hair, shared comics, and watched the stars with me. But now, she's also the one who left her mother's blood on my sheets, who looked me in the eyes and lied, who made me question everything I believed about love and loyalty and what we're capable of when we're desperate enough. To this day, I don't know if I'll ever fully heal. I lost more than a friend. I lost a piece of myself. The part that believed you could always save someone if you just stayed close enough, long enough. She was my sister in every way but blood. I loved her. And now all I can do is close the book, not burn it, not forget, just close it, lay it gently on the shelf and walk away. Because whatever she became, whatever she did, that's her story now. Mine is just the silence she left behind. Story 8, The Open Door. I grew up in a quiet Midwestern town, the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and kids came home when the streetlights flickered on. After college, I returned, hoping to recapture that small-town simplicity. I moved into one of only 2 apartment buildings in town, a modest complex nestled between tree-lined streets and sleepy sidewalks. It was peaceful, comfortable. I'd lived there for about 3 months and everything felt predictable, until the night that changed it all. It was a Friday. I turned in early, wrapped in blankets in soft light, with my cat Marcy curled beside me. I wasn't expecting anything unusual, but that night, something broke the quiet, something that still echoes in the darkest parts of my mind. It was around 2 or 3 in the morning when I stirred from sleep. I couldn't say what woke me at first, a sound, a shift in air, a strange sense of alertness. I lay still, listening. Then I heard it. A voice, muffled but close. I sat up slowly, my breath caught in my throat. My bedroom faced the hallway that led directly to the front door. I leaned slightly, just enough to peer down that corridor, and there it was. My front door wide open, leading into the hallway of the apartment building. Light spilled from the kitchen, and I heard someone talking. Not a conversation, just a single voice talking quickly, erratically, like someone arguing with themselves, or with someone I couldn't hear. I froze. For a moment, all I could feel was cold silence in my veins. I stayed completely still, unsure what to do. I wanted to believe it was a dream, a misunderstanding, but the voice was real. The open door was real, and someone was in my apartment. I slipped silently off the bed and crouched to the floor, crawling toward the opposite side where my nightstand sat. I reached up, grabbed my phone and slid beneath the bed. Marcy followed instinctively, nestling beside me, her body tense. I dialed 911 as quietly as I could. A calm voice answered, and I whispered that someone was inside my apartment. I didn't want to talk too loudly. I didn't know how close he was. But he was moving, pacing in the kitchen, still rambling. I told the operator everything I could make out. She stayed on the line, asking for updates. My hands shook as I held the phone. The man started ringing my doorbell from the inside, over and over. I think he was trying to draw me out. He yelled for me to come out, said things I didn't understand. And in the middle of that chaos, I began to realize something that made my stomach twist. He wasn't just confused. He was dangerous. I whispered to the operator that I was afraid he wasn't alone, that maybe others were coming. My heart pounded as he moved through the apartment. He entered my spare bedroom, a small space I used for storage. I heard boxes being tossed, shelves being knocked down. He kept talking, his words slurred and wild, like he was riding a wave of delusion. Then it went quiet, and I heard footsteps, slow and heavy, coming down the hallway toward my bedroom. I stopped breathing. I watched his feet pass my bed. From beneath the frame, I could see his shoes, the hem of his pants, the way he moved. Sluggish but deliberate. He went to my closet first. I heard him rummaging through my clothes, throwing them to the floor. Then he turned. I felt the mattress sink slightly above me. He was sitting on my bed. I clenched my jaw, afraid even the smallest sound would give me away. I could hear him breathing. Shallow, strained. The silence stretched out, and then, after what felt like an eternity, he got up and walked out of the room. I didn't move. I couldn't. The 911 operator kept whispering reassurance, but all I could focus on was the sound of his steps echoing in my home. He began screaming again, this time louder, angrier. I heard glass break, things being thrown. He returned to the kid's room, the one he'd already torn apart, and started yelling again about killing someone. That was when the operator told me the police were close. I could barely speak. I just whispered please over and over. Then suddenly, I heard another voice. A man's voice, but not the same one. It came from the doorway. "Hey man, you're in the wrong house," he said. Relief hit me so fast I almost passed out. The intruder didn't resist. I heard the front door shut. Officers entered. A female officer knelt beside my bed and gently pulled me out. I was crying. I didn't even realize it until I felt the tears on my cheeks. She guided me to stand and told me everything was okay now. I dressed quickly while she waited outside. When I finally stepped out of the room, the apartment looked like a storm had torn through it. Clothes scattered everywhere, shelves knocked down, trash from the bins spread across the hallway. They told me the man had been found in the guest room, naked, holding a bottle of lotion. There was a hat nearby, filled with a substance they didn't describe. They asked if any of the clothes weren't mine. Told them no. The man had entered my home, completely unclothed, and destroyed everything in his path. He wasn't someone who had simply walked into the wrong apartment. He had planned to be there, to do something. And if I hadn't hidden under that bed, if I had confronted him, I don't know what would have happened. The aftermath was messy. emotionally more than physically. The man was arrested, charged, and taken into custody, but the court system didn't offer much closure. I was subpoenaed to testify, but the hearing kept getting postponed. I eventually found out that he'd pled guilty and received only 180 days. He'd had prior offences, including a history on the sex offender registry. They gave him an additional 180 days for a previous warrant. That was it. Less than a year behind bars for what he did to me, to my home, to my sense of safety. I tracked him after his release. He violated parole, disappeared. I've moved 3 times since then, each time hoping distance would make the fear fade. It hasn't. I still check the locks 3 times before bed, still flinch when I hear footsteps in the hallway, still sleep with Marcy tucked against me like a tiny furry shield. It's been 2 years. I'm still healing, still learning to live in a world where safety is never guaranteed. I try to tell myself it's over, that I survived, that I did everything right. And maybe I did. Maybe hiding saved me. But there are nights when I lie awake, staring at the ceiling, and think about how close I came to being a name in a headline. How quickly everything I thought was stable could unravel. So if you're listening to this, take this to heart, lock your doors, trust your instincts, and never ignore the voice inside you that says something isn't right. Because sometimes it isn't. And sometimes the person already inside isn't there to leave quietly.